Hello again, Ian Stuckey with Mastermind Games. This is going to be my last Warmachine model for a while, but ending up with a bang. This is Deneghra the Soul Weaver, i.e. Deneghra 3, a Cryx Battle Engine Warcaster. Fairskin 09047. So Deneghra is the twin sister of Victoria Haley of Signar, and she was kidnapped when she was about 5 or so. Haley grew up assuming Deneghra was not her original name, but Haley grew up assuming her sister was dead. Never imagined that in her adult life they would be reunited as bitter enemies. Initially, Haley did not know Deneghra was her long-lost sister. But when Deneghra revealed that, they fought to the death, and while Haley lost an arm, Deneghra lost her life. She was reanimated as an undead by the Lich Asphyxius, and would continue her machinations to try to bump off her sister. And technically succeed, though Haley would use her time manipulation abilities to recover her body. And right along the midriff here, it's probably a little tricky to see, is a crudely stitched scar where Deneghra was cut in half. Okay. Getting all the exposed skin. Well, Deneghra is always depicted as wearing a mask, is always shown wearing a mask. If you want to know what she looks like underneath, she is the whoa. The wing got hooked to my water cup. She is the identical twin of Victoria Haley of Signar, so you can use that to figure it out. Okay, I'm going to put my water cup somewhere else because that hooked wing keeps snagging on it. This is going to be one of the longest videos I've done in a while just because of all the surface area I have to cover. Okay. Oh, decisions. This might be a bad decision. Next, I'm going to take, I think, Wasteland Soil, which is an army painter paint, and get the tongue of the creature here. So, battle engines are heavy artillery vehicles, basically. And Cryx's battle engine, the Wraith engine, is basically equal parts ghost and machine. So Deneghra's custom weapon of mass destruction should not be much different in construction. This is really thin and really awkward because huge, impressive model. I'm probably going to need to do a second layer of this. Let's try mixing up paint. Might be a little thin. One of the disadvantages of these battle engine casters is they are big, easy targets, but they can be really powerful. What's unusual is Deneghra's only weapon is her spear. The battle engine itself doesn't seem to have any armaments directly on it, at least not that any that are being used in combat. But regardless, Deneghra is not a hand-to-hand type caster. She's a spell type warcaster. So she wants to hang out in the back and sling spells. This will be the third version of Deneghra, and using this battle engine, using this battle engine in her own power, actually, she managed to hold a joint task force consisting of Signar, Khador, and Protectorate of Menoth forces at a standstill on her own, while troops evacuated from the Cryx Necrofactorium that was being attacked and evacuated. I think I just slaughtered the English language right there again. I've got to watch that. Okay. Now, think a second. Okay. Next, Old Bronze 09197. Yeah, this is fair enough. Gonna switch brushes. There's no way with the size of the model and the limited scope of the camera this isn't going to be awkward, at least at times. So, gonna get this plate below the machine's mouth. These soul cages. Again, Cryx equals super evil. They actually weaponize the souls they steal, whether it's for a brief burst of magical power or turning them into ammunition for weapons like what the Harrower Heavy Warjack quips. And then I'm going to start on some of these pipes and inner workings here. Again, this thing is equal parts machine and undead in all likeliness. This is also debatably a model I should have done a partial assembly on, but I feel confident I can take care of Deneghra while she's still mounted to her machine. Now some of this here I might redo. My plan is for the inner workings to be in the bronze and the armored plates of the carapace to be in a different color. There'll be ample lighting effects on this thing. There's plenty of places to light up. I think my exact model might have been defective because this tail didn't really assemble quite right. I'm going to worry about that right now. There are going to be other colors, and I'm going to need to pick out on this tail the barbs, and there's a lot of wrappings around it. I'll pick that out after I've gotten the underlying structure. Big snake dragon thing, more or less. This in particular down here is where his tail did not assemble quite right. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, let's work on the shoulder joint here. And something like this on wings is tattered logically shouldn't be able to fly, but it does because Cryx uses a type of coal infused with necromantic magic called necrotite, which, aside from the ethical and moral implications of using a coal infused with suffering, it also releases fumes more toxic than carbon monoxide. There's no in-game effect for this, but living Cryx troops take precautions, and the undead troops, which are generally the ones who actually work on their weaponry, don't really care. They can't die because they're already dead. Just going to go along out to the middle of the blades. And I'll be taking care of these. Oh, filaments is not quite the right word. Strips of flesh may be a little better. But I'll be picking those out in another color later on. Let's go ahead and get the back side before I switch over to the front again. This is probably going to end up being a fairly simple color scheme overall. It's just going to take a while because I have so much surface area to cover. Some people like to use airbrushes on this type of model. I don't have one and don't particularly feel like getting one, to be honest. But that is a possibility. Though in the case of really any of these models, the airbrushing would be done on the largest colors with brushwork done on these smaller areas, more detailed areas. See, keep conking that background. Just big, impressive model. Oh boy. There's no way to do this that isn't going to be awkward. It's even awkward when I'm not trying to actively record the process here. I'm just about done with this color. Once I get these struts for the wings, I'm just going to go back to Deneghra and pick out a few details on her armor, so that she's got a two-tone look there. Okay. Do a little more of that Wasteland swell on the tongue here. Real quick while it's still wet. And just go ahead and touch up her seat on the saddle. And then for armor, let's see here. And I just put my hand on the area I just painted. Oh boy. Let's go ahead and do the haft of her spear. I'm sure it's got a name, I just can't remember what it is right this minute. But most warcasters have specific named weapons. Let's do the ankle and knee guards. Seems reasonable. Just for the sake of adding a little extra color, we'll do the backpack on the warcaster armor. About the shoulders. Tricky to see where the shoulder begins there with those big horns on her helmet. That seems alright. I'll take that big brush again and just do a quick overview of what I bumped. Or brush over, and then yellow bone 09143. Might be pushing it, but I'm going to try to go ahead and get the skull of the battle engine mount. Which could, in all honesty, be made from a dragon spawn. It certainly has the look of one. But the Cryx is ruled by a dragon named Toruk, and all of the dragons of the Iron Kingdoms emit a sort of radiation called blight that mutates and kills living creatures. Most can't control it, but one dragon, Everblight, can, and he's got his own faction of mutants and dragon spawn, which are more or less meat puppets that any dragon can create. While dragons are normally depicted as being insanely powerful, in the Iron Kingdoms they are pretty over the top in that regard, just with the old radiation thing alone. But Cryx has learned how to use blighted bones in the construction of their warjacks and other weaponry. Actually, why their lights are called bone jacks, because they actually do use bones of mutated creatures, which they've learned to artificially blight after death as well, to increase production. And I'm going to need to stop there, let some of this dry, and move on in a bit. Oh boy. Alright, next up I'm going to take Deep Red 09002. So there's literally no way of doing this without it being awkward, just because of the size of the model and the limited space, so this simply is what it is. Now with this, I'm going to be getting some of this wrapping or binding around the tail. Looks like cloth, but I think some kind of flesh or sinew would be more appropriate given the undead theme of Cryx overall. Let's see here. And again, this is a mixture of flesh and metal. There's equal parts machine and undead. So the angles are really awkward here, but I'm going to try to get one side first. And if I end up nicking some of the machinery underneath, that's just going to roll with it. And you can see here is where the reinforcement bands really start to kick in. even on their heaviest machines, Cryx kind of skimps on armor, so they're not as durable as Battle Engines other factions would have be using. But like I said, there's no way of doing this on camera in a way that isn't going to be awkward. Mostly because of the odd angles I'm going to have to hold this at to keep it on camera. And you'll notice I've switched to a detail brush at this point completely. I won't be going back to larger brushes until I do shading and highlighting. Keeping my brush moist but not overly wet, or at least I'm trying to keep it from getting overly wet. It's a balancing act on a lot of this. It looks like the tip of the tail is more thoroughly wrapped in this than I initially thought. Let's see here. Now, the exposed piping and mechanisms are definitely more prevalent as we get closer to the body. And that where the wrapping is replaced with actual armor. Okay, and then the jaw under the armor as well. Cryx, warjacks, and battle engines are designed as weapons of intimidation as much as they are weapons of war. Which is why they have a distinctly monstrous appearance compared to what other factions use, and could be mistaken for organic creatures. Okay. And the last of this is actually on the wings here with these tendon-like veins. Hypothetically, something like this, even by the Iron Kingdom's standards, should not be able to fly, but the necromantically infused coal known as necrotite burns hotter than normal coal, burns stronger, and allows for things that really shouldn't be. Though to be fair, we are talking about a world with actual magic, which is the ultimate MacGuffin, so anything should go anyway. I mean, the upcoming Riot Quest game by Privateer Press, from what I've understood so far, is based on an alternate timeline where Signar Warcaster Victoria Haley used her powers to basically screw up royally. The only reason I'm even paying attention to that game is because the models for it will be compatible with Warmachine, so that's something. It's its own beast, though. So I'm not too concerned about nicking the bronze because this flesh is kind of grafted to the wing assembly. As far as I know, the battle engine itself doesn't actually have a name. It's just a tool, for lack of a word, that Deneghra is using at this point in her career. This is her third version again. So I'm not going to care too much if the shading intermingles between the bronze and the red or sinew, I guess I'll call it. In fact, I might go ahead and try shading wet on wet here just to push that effect that this material is stretched very tautly over metal and merged with it in a very uncomfortable way. Part here even looks like it might actively be bleeding. holding on. Whoa, and I nicked the bottom. Oh boy. Like I said, there's no way of painting something this big on camera with the apparatus I have that isn't going to be awkward. Definitely impressive, though. One of those showcase pieces. Yeah, don't be too worried about keeping a model upright while painting. Sometimes doing it at a different angle is going to serve you better. Such as right now where I'm holding the back of it to better paint these sinews. I'm keeping my brush both moist and fairly well laden with paint. I see some of the black still coming through, and that's okay in this case. It'll help to make it look more unnatural when I do the shading. Just about done with this step. Yeah, something this large doesn't paint quickly, and you don't want to rush this in general. I know there's a lot of speed painting out there, and that's all the rage, but I prefer to take a slower approach. I do this to relax, not to... Yeah, I do this more to relax than I do to compete, so... Now the back, let's see, I think I missed a spot there I want to get, yeah. Now the back side. You'll see that this stuff is more solidly anchored to the back than it is to the front. Need a little more paint. It'll help to reduce the number of visible brush strokes, which usually isn't an issue at this scale anyway, but just trying to go in one direction. But again, it usually isn't too visible at this scale anyway. I'd say it applies more to regular oil or acrylic painting with full-size canvases than anything else. But just about done with this wing. debatably I could be using a larger brush, but at this point I'm not going to bother switching out. Okay. Now the other side. Now this is a situation where it would be easier done with holding the model in the right hand and painting in the left. Unfortunately, I am right-handed. And while I've been trying to teach myself to be ambidextrous, it's not been going well, and I don't want to risk screwing up on a model I'll only get one of. And like I said, there's no way of painting something this large on camera in a way that isn't going to be awkward. That motion is from the model shaking in my hand as I paint it, even as lightly as I'm touching. Because I can't exactly have a solid grip from this angle. I just conked my camera again. That would be slightly less awkward for me, though still awkward for the camera. I still think ideally some kind of camera I could wear to do true first person would be the best, but can't find one outside of a GoPro, and those are more than I want to pay right now for this particular side project. And the rig I have, as awkward as it is, will do for now. Okay. So there's one more bit I can do right this minute. And that's going to be 09089 Cloudy Gray. It's going to be on the rocks that the base of the tail is sitting on. It's another piece where I think the tail assembly on my particular model is a slight miscast, because this should go flat, but it really doesn't, and the material is very stiff. Well, that's good for durability. It's a little awkward. You can see the gap right there where it doesn't quite touch. And it didn't really bend too well to get it glued down while I was assembling. So it is what it is, though. It's fine. The purpose of this is actually as a solid anchor point, but again, kind of just a funky little what I think is a miscast. So just got one base coat left, then move on to shading. Okay, last base coat is 09205 black. No, we'll say second to last is Blackened Steel 09205. Need quite a bit of this. So use a smaller brush to start with and start on Deneghra herself. unless she's wearing a lightly armored bikini. It's a war witch thing. I'm gonna get this crude staples on the scar where she was cut in half. Be careful not to knock over my water with this while I'm doing this. As I said before, this is going to get awkward no matter how I do it, simply by virtue of how large the model is and how small the area my camera can cover is. Collar and helmet, at least from the back. Now, the apparatus on her back, these wing-like shapes used to be called in the game witch barbs, or are a set of blades worn by war witches on their backs to help them deflect incoming blows. And now it's reflected by the parry ability. I don't know if this version has it, but most of Deneghra's versions do. Which simply means that she can't be targeted by free strikes. Again, I can't remember if this version has it or not. It's a helmet. Probably have to do some touch-ups, but that's alright. I said this is a very awkward model to work with just because of the size, coupled with trying to film it while I paint. With much of the challenge just from keeping it on camera while I do this. Now, finishing with the boots. Should be noted that Warcaster armor generates a type of force field called a power field. That can be overcharged with unused focus. Currently, that's reflected. It's called overboosting, and that's reflected by the ability of Warcasters to use an unspent focus to reduce damage when they're hit. The mechanics were different in older games, but it turned out to be a bit game-breaking, since less well-armored characters like Deneghra with high focus could essentially camp their focus and take hits better than heavily armored characters like Dominic Darius or Karchet the Terrible. But the previous mechanic was unspent focus directly added to armor. Now it's simply you can spend one to reduce damage. So squishier characters like Deneghra's first two versions. Well, now they're still fairly squishy. Alright. So I'm going to use the detail brush up around the head and switch to a larger one for the bigger, thicker armor plates. Getting the saddle. And I haven't forgotten the chains of the soul cages. I'll be doing those in a different color, or rather a slightly different color when I hit the actual blades. Right this second, I just want to make certain to get these finer details around Deneghra first. Now let's see. Okay. Oh, that's actually, never mind. That's supposed to be part of the cloth, not metal. Okay. I can fix that. I'll have to let that dry for a minute first. That's alright. Okay, it's got the saddle. I'll go ahead and let's see. Okay, I can switch brushes at this point, so we'll go a little bigger now. Going along the hard plates of the armor. Just start on the shoulders here. Shoulders and body. There will be lighting effects applying. I'll be picking those out after I hit the shading. And again, this is a model some of my friends would probably use airbrushes on, but I don't have one and I don't particularly care to get one, to be honest. I personally am fine painting like this. These smokestacks were each individual pieces that had to be glued on separately. Got this thinned out a bit more than I think I normally would as well. And with a model like this, since it's so big, it's also going to be easy to lose my place if I jump around too much. So I'm trying to do one section at a time. Well, I might need more paint, and that's okay if I do. I'm going to use the resources I need to do this properly. And my hand's starting to get catch on that wing. That is what it is. Let's see here. Yeah, probably like that. I am repainting a little of the bronze earlier. Okay, that was tedious, but that's alright. Part of the hobby, so going along the front of the model. Getting armor plates designed to deflect incoming fire from the more delicate mechanisms that allow it to be so flexible with that serpentine body shape. I think I'll leave those bindings bronze. Okay. Well, and I hit the water cup again. Okay. Pick out armor on the wings. And here, I think, as well, and there. That looks pretty good. Looks like I might have exactly enough of this paint out to do what I want to do. I thought I missed something. There we go. Right. Let's switch back to detail. Well, and my brush just plain flew through my cup. I'm going to switch back to my detail brush. Take Wasteland Soil again, the Army Painter one. And do a few touch-ups while I give that a little more time to dry. So I can finish up the base coats here and now. And I just dropped my brush. Oh boy. See how this is going? So I'm just gonna nick this seat here and this piece I mistakenly thought was metal. A little more on the tongue. We'll do a little fair skin again, 09047. A bit on the inner thigh here, chest, and the face, which just has too much water in it. Let's try that again. Better. And there, it's okay. Now, 09206 Tarnished Steel for the blades and chains. I'm going to stick with a detail brush for this. Get the blades on the witch barbs. This is going to be, again, awkward no matter how I do it. have to do the best I can. Too much water there. The blades on her spear. I know it's got a specific name, but I just can't think of what it is right now. Again, this is also her primary melee weapon. However, just like her first two versions, Deneghra is a spellcasting type warcaster, so she generally wants to be in the back casting spells. Can't quite remember what her current loadout is, but she is, her previous versions focus mostly on really devastating debuffs. Go ahead and do these spikes along the back. It's going to do them on one orientation and the other, though. Again, the battle engine doesn't actually use these in combat. At least not in the game anyway. That would be awesome if it did. Well, with the CID in effect, it is possible for weapon outlaws to change at least somewhat to add in some of the battle engine's own arsenal, but we'll see what happens. From what I understand, Ravager Press is going to slow down on the CID updates. It's been getting a bit too much too soon. I think a case where they got overexcited about the possibilities of what it could mean for the game and kind of going a little too far with it. Just like the concept that they were going to do a new faction every year, which is kind of starting to taper off since that as well has gone a little too far too fast. Back on the other side of that tail barb. And between the jaws on this thing and that big spike on the tail, I personally do feel like this version of Deneghra should have at least one more weapon reflecting what the battle engine can do, but again, all that's on her current rule set is her spear. Be careful here, trying not to nick the bronze I hit earlier. It's going to do the back side and then the front side. All these spikes, hooks, and blades. It's possible these on the corner, on the joint here might be bone, but I'm doing it this way and that's all there is to it. It's, again, not easy keeping this on camera when I've got such a large model in such a small area I can film in. Especially when I've got the camera positioned so that it's in front of me. Okay. Be careful here not to hit any of the front I did earlier. Well, there was a few metal components. Or, no, I think this one's actually all plastic and resin. So some of these are a little bent. There's not much of anything I can do about it. Shock hardening doesn't work on resin and only really works effectively on softer plastics. Stiff plastics can snap way too easily. And shock hardening is you run the part over hot water until it gets soft and pliable. Then while bending and holding it into position, you dip it quickly, take it from the hot water where it's warm and flexible into ice cold water, like actual ice water, to stiffen it. I've done it before, but while it can, again, help restore the shape, it can also make the plastic more brittle, and it only works on plastics that have some pliability to them in the first place. So that's just something to be conscious of. Okay, well, that was a painstaking process, but that's base coats. Take a breather, let it dry, and start shading. Alright, time to start shading. Blackened steel 09205. Base coats, you want to go lowest area to highest, shading highest area to lowest, and highlighting lowest to highest. Which means starting this step with the blades. Half paint, half water in most cases, including this time. This goes a little quicker because of how diluted the paint is. It goes on a little faster and runs down. It also has the underlying base coat to work with. Don't need to worry too much about the back side. It'll flow around reasonably well. this. This is about as awkward as it looks. Again, just trying to keep a very large model on camera while I do this. Just letting it flow in and around. I am working fairly quickly here. Keeping my brush wet. To try to absorb that little droplet there. Just make sure the back is thoroughly covered. Those chains earlier, you can see it, some of the paint wound up on the back anyway, so I wasn't concerned about the chains as much, especially since the back side that faces towards the interior of the model isn't as visible. And that last bit was me just brushing off a little bit that got on the bronze there on that wing blade. Yeah, they are blades. They may not be a functioning weapon in-game, but they're definitely sharp and pointy. Okay. Okay, let's see here. I think I'm going to have to wait for a bit before moving on, so back in a bit. Okay, this is going to be a longer segment. Adamantium Black 09124. About half paint, half water again, and I'm going to start with a detail brush. This is a metallic black. Let's start with Deneghra's armor. Making sure I get a thorough coat. Okay. And this part of the weapon. getting the head of the battle engine creature machine. Not really any other way to put it. Going along the saddle. Again, we're using the detail brush. Now I can switch to a larger brush. Still keeping things nice and wet. Letting the paint flow where it's going to flow, at least for the most part. Focusing on one section of the carapace at a time to minimize the chance of me missing anything. Make sure to get each smokestack individually here. Can go back in and hit the armor in between. There are literally a dozen of these. I need more paint. Going around, using the broad side of the brush. And a lot of that flowed onto the carapace already, so I just need to go a little over, or go over it a little bit now. I'm just trying to mix up the words I'm needing to use here. Here's where it'll start to get tricky. Because while I want to get these front panels of the armor, I want to make sure I don't hit the bronze if I can avoid it. You can see I already managed to snag my brush in between the soul cages up on the hanging from the neck anyway. Size there. Keeping things thinned out. Now for the armor on the wings. gonna have to let that dry again before moving on. They're getting there. Next up, Scorched Metal 09125. Starting with the detail brush again, half paint, half water. This is where by playing around with the shades and highlights, you can get different effects. So this will make the bronze look darker and more corrupted, which fits Cryx very well. Too much on the brush. Take caution with the shading, especially so you don't get it all over the place, especially in areas you don't want it to end up. Across the face and then the back here with a detail brush still. And I think underneath on the neck, these pipes and hoses. I'm gonna have to just do this entire step with a detail brush, so getting the ribs here. And that is fair enough to call them ribs. Even if they're steel, that's the intended effect. Attempting to get all this piping, all these bands. Again, working with angles that are fairly awkward here. Keeping the brush wet. This is going to be very tricky no matter how I do it. for lack of a better word, reinforcement that holds the blade to the tip. Now, going on to the wings. Going to get one facing first and the other. Using short, controlled strokes. Trying to get the excess out of that gap, otherwise it will just kind of stay there. It kind of worked. It's gonna be awkward no matter how I do it. Along the back now. Some of this is seeping onto those blades, and that's okay. It'll help convey the corruption inherent in Cryx. And keeping the brush wet. This step and just letting things flow. This is where it gets really awkward based on the angle I need to hold this. And by deliberately letting your paints flow into each other through the shading stick, you can get some interesting effects, but you will be sacrificing control if you do it, and this is a model where I do not wish to do that on, but it is something to think about. Hitting the other wing. Trying to get it into every nook and cranny that I'm able to, especially with these intricately detailed mechanisms. It's okay to have the metal hitting this membrane. This is supposed to be an uncomfortable amalgamation of undead flesh and corrupted metal. So that works for it. Finishing up on the front. Get a little more on the top of that other joint there. Following the strut down. Just about done. Letting the paint flow where it's going to. There's one more bit I can do here. And that's going to be Grimoire purple. Which is plucked up. Quick clear with a paper clip. That's just to get this cushion there anyway. Just like that, okay. There's going to be one more shade, then some lighting, or one more shade than lighting effects. Just about there. Alright, going to prep the lighting effects next. Pure White 09039. Eyes. And the smokestacks on her. And the engine built into her armor. I'm going to fit it out a little. Get the soul cages hanging off. Oh boy. Like I've said several times already, this is just going to be awkward, and that's all there is to it. Try trying to be careful not to hit any areas that are not connected to what I'm trying to get in this lighting effect. Having a little of this hit adjacent areas will actually help give the illusion that it's glowing. Just don't want to get too far from the area to be affected. Right. Doing this essentially is a wash here now. I'm gonna get grill behind Deneghra. This is directly on the saddle. Yep. Well, technically, this is also part of the neck or saddle, whichever. This where it gets a little tricky because her witch barbs are in the way. You'll see with the wash I've done, this channel practically sucks up the paint. I'll do the same with these vents on the tail. And then the rib apparatus here. So, how do I want to do this? Probably this section here. And letting the paint itself do as much of the work as I can. As I've said before, this is just going to be awkward, and that's all there is to it. Make certain this is still operating. Okay. We're getting a glitch here. Hang on. Okay. The joys of technical difficulties strike again. And the video like this, I only get one shot. Not one of those things where I can just do take 2 or take 3. Not without stripping paint for a month and a half, anyway. It could be especially counterintuitive for me, since a big part of my goal with this is to just record what I'm trying to paint anyway. Okay. So, getting the vents on each of these smokestacks. We're trying to. This is, again, really awkward, but... And another good argument for doing a partial assembly first, but again, I chose not to. Each of these was a separate piece, and there are actually 3 different sizes. I don't technically have to, well, technically I don't have to do anything with this. I can put as much or as little detail in as I want, so just bear that in mind. Personal taste accounts for a lot. If you don't feel like doing this, then don't. In fact, I am showing a color scheme. It is not even close to the only one. And it's okay in this step to get a little crude with this, because it will be covered up with a highlight when I'm done. And most of this errant paint, or rather most of the errant paint, will be covered up with the highlight. Now, doing the teardrop shape in each of the smokestacks. Bulk of this body is mostly boiler, I would have to say. Let's make sure some funny noises. Okay. Okay. That preps the lighting effect. And now, Ghoul Skin 09148. This is the last shade, and it's going on quite a bit. So thinning it out about half paint, half water to make a wash. Start on Deneghra's flesh. This will result in an unnatural skin tone, which works well because Deneghra is not among the living anymore and hasn't been for a while. Nick the back of her head there, that's supposed to be helmet, not skin. Which come out when I highlight though. It's not easy trying to do this on camera in this manner, but especially with a model this big, but I have to try. Keep trying till I get it right. It's tricky because the undercut there. Let's find out. Okay. I'm going to switch to a larger brush for the rest of it. Start with the tongue and jaws. That binding, which I see is made of undead, or yeah, undead flesh. Keep my brush wet again. Some of the black seeped onto that. That's all right though. I'm okay if this hits some of the pipe work in between. After all, this thing is supposed to be an uncomfortable amalgamation of metal and flesh. And I guess there is one more shade I forgot about, and that's on the rock, so make sure to get that taken care of as well. That's one problem when you got a model this big, or actually any model in this hobby. It can be easy to overlook something or forget something when you're just in the thick of it trying to finish up. Now, up to the shading, I like to get every nook I can. But with the highlighting, I generally only concern myself with the most readily visible surfaces. So, for example, I don't do highlighting, say, under skirts. Well, frame rate's okay so far still. Here are the wings. or what passes for wings. Trying to do this quickly at this point, but not so quickly that I make severe mistakes. Doing a model this large just takes longer. That's all there is to it. So this is not a hobby for impatient people, so bear that in mind as well. Backside of that. Again, this is awkward just because of the bulk of the model coupled with trying to do this all on camera and not holding it at angles that are really optimal for this. Don't have an option really either in this case. Okay, that's got one wing completely done. Now I just got half a wing left to finish. I realized that other wing I could have saved myself some effort going from the high, from the most, the highest part to the lowest, which, good grief, I've said that many times already. So I'm just trying to push the shade out of those, or clear any gaps that kind of get stuck between forms of film if I don't do that. Okay. So you'll see that is dripping a bit. That's okay, it's going to happen. It'll get worked out when I highlight. So I've got the one more shade here now that I almost forgot about, and then the lighting effects that I can highlight and finish up. Alright. Pale green 09012, this with a lighting effect. Well, so far so good on this gray-green shading. Deneghra should have a sufficiently disturbing skin tone by the time I finish highlighting. Maybe my little one. About half paint. Yeah. So you want to go a little more than half paint, half water for a lighting effect. That's too much water. Want to make sure to leave some of the light behind when possible, and in a situation like that, trippage is exactly why I keep this paper towel on hand. So I might have gone a little too far on that one. Let's got it. Let's listen to that spill over. See if I can get the face without. Okay, there we go. And you want some of the light showing through. And if you want to get really fancy, you can even do lighting effects on areas near the actual glowing bits. And going a little more crudely on these areas gives the effect that this lighting is not necessarily contained by its prescribed boundaries, which again helps sell the illusion. Though I do know a guy who's going to try to put LEDs into a Signor storm wall to get it to glow. That's also an option if you happen to be an electronics whiz. And actually, something along those lines is something I want to try with a few select Warhammer 40,000 models at some point in the future, but that's a project for another day. Probably a year or so down the road at least before I ready to tackle those. But I'm just going over the white areas. I'm not too concerned with the spillover because that will be covered up at least well enough by the highlighting. There's another reason to go from high area to low on the shading and lighting effects. Then I'll be going low area to high area on the lighting. I just conked my camera. Gotta be careful about that. And I might try upgrading my video software here. I've been getting an annoying bombardment of automatic ads from the program I use to go for the new version. Well, it's offering enough of a deal that it's worth considering. So it's just something I'm taking under consideration. Might help. I would hope it couldn't hinder, but then again, when I first installed Windows 10, it broke a bunch of stuff. It was working fine before. Okay. Just gonna get every pipe just one at a time, I think. Not overly concerned about the bleed, again, because it'll help sell the illusion that These are actually glowing. Also, when I'm getting a little cruder, I'm letting my hand go a little more freely than I normally would. As much as the painting aspect of this hobby requires you to be something of a control freak, there are times it's better to let go of that control. Just about done with all these smokestacks. Though given the volume and the size, also within the realm of speculation, this might act as a sort of jetpack to propel this massive thing off the ground. You gotta love steampunk engineering, where things that are even impossible today are accomplished by just making them bigger and bulkier. Yeah, that's a little better. To make sure I'm still... Oh boy, not again with this. Okay, the camera got funky again. It might actually be the program, but alright, whatever, let's just... 09088 Stormy Gray, I'll get this rock on the base, and hopefully this little whatever it was doesn't happen again while I'm doing this. So... not too much here, just going over this stone. Well, it's a mix with what looks like stone and mechanical parts, but I interpreted it as stone when I first started painting it, so I'm not going to change that now, so feel free to get fancier. Actually, feel free to do whatever you want. I'm only giving a solution, not, the penultimate solution to painting. Alright, so pure white 09039. I'm going to start the front arc. So unlike the rest of the Warmachine line, the huge base models have little markings for the front arc, which on models this size is split in half into two fields of fire. It's an important mechanic because many huge based models have multiple weapons on multiple limbs or multiple sides. Yeah, so this is a secondary restriction they have outside of their, being big, easy targets. So they can't bear all of their firepower on the entire battlefield at once. Okay. So, once that's dry, I can start highlighting, detailing, and finish up the base. Alright, get the base worked on a little bit more. Pure black 09037. And this is just to cover up any streamings of paint like that green right there. Just make it look nice and uniform. Try not to nick any of the white on the other side. So I'm going to need that intact for what I'm doing next. And I will be doing something going a little more elaborate on the basing on Deneghra here than I've done before, so there'll be an extra step to that, but you'll see what it is when I hit pale green again, 09012. Look at the front arc color. So because I'm using a bright color on black primer, that's why I need to prep it in white first. That gives it, that way I can use just one coat of the green. Just going to go right up to that raised divot there. Again on the opposite side. The green lighting effect is still very much wet, so I have to wait, at least in some areas, so I've got to hold off a bit longer before I can highlight, but just about there. There'll be one more thing I do to the base before I flock it, but that's not really relevant right this minute, but you will see it. Always clean out your brushes as thoroughly as you can between paints. Helps them to last longer. Alright, time to highlight. Fair highlights, 09048. And you're going to use a ragged, ratty looking brush. No water. Then rub most of the paint off on a paper towel till it looks like there's nothing left, and lightly dust the area to be affected. This is crux of the dry brushing technique. And this will catch on the raised areas. But not the recessed, so it'll leave your shade and help make the raised areas pop. There's also a way to touch up any mistakes made. Next, Orc Blood. This is a army paint or Warpaints, so this doesn't have a number. That is not well mixed at all. Let's try that again. Okay, trying to make sure it's not dropping, hundreds of frames a second. And it's still not there yet. There we go. So to show you, this not what you want. You can see the mixing medium and the pigment is not all that there. This is what you want, where it's just one solid color. And hence the name dry brushing. You do need to keep your brush dry during this. Just a little bit on the settle there, considering mostly with the most visible areas. And now I'm going to switch to a slightly larger brush and do the tongue. Making sure I'm not getting, you know, hundreds of dropped frames. And then Creamy Ivory's 09144. On highlighting, you want to go from the lowest point on the model, generally the skin tone, to the highest. And I'm going to need to switch brushes fairly liberally, which I can do since I have so many that are suitable for this, but that in mind, you want to make sure your brush is almost completely dry. That's really good right there. Let's see, next, making sure I'm not... Okay. How about the red? So, Blood Red 09003. Again, I'm getting kind of paranoid about my system suddenly dropping hundreds of frames over the course of a few seconds, so I'm just keeping an eye on it. Unfortunately, due to space considerations, my monitor is behind me. Ideally, it should be in front, but you work with what you got, even if it's not ideal. This brush might be a little too stiff to work with this, but I'll try rolling with it for a little longer before I consider switching. It takes quite a bit of experience and practice to figure out, you know, what's a good brush for this and what isn't, but again, something fairly ragged and feathered is best. They don't really sell them like that, but you'll eventually acquire some as your brushes wear out. And I'll switch to a larger one for the wings. This should work. So, that's a decent one. Refresh your paint as needed. Okay, I'm going to try to grip by the body. There's no way of going about this that isn't going to be awkward to a certain extent. Going against raised edges whenever possible to really catch, that'll really catch the paint and help make this pop. And just, again, since so much of this hobby anyway is based on personal taste, don't stop until you're satisfied. more paint. This is again Blood Red 09003. Ideally, you don't want to end up gripping the model anywhere where there's going to be potentially wet paint. So that sometimes on a model this size might mean waiting until things dry out, but because there's almost no water in here, the highlights will dry fairly quickly. Almost, but not quite instantaneously in ideal conditions, but temperature and humidity have a lot to do with that. I had a friend that actually, she painted her models with oil paints. That takes a while. Oil paints take a lot longer to dry than water-based acrylic paints like these. Just something to keep in mind. But you can get different effects that way. Alright. Cleaning out. Get a fresh surface ready for continued dry brushing because the paper towel I'm using is getting pretty thoroughly filled. Let's see. Okay. Tarnished Brass 09198. Going to need a more controlled touch with this. So going back to a smaller, thinner brush. Going for the bands and the tail. Exposed piping. Of course, this hilt that holds the blade, the tail's blade. I think I'll go ahead and see, yeah. Go under the neck next. This head plate. Bronze on Deneghra's armor next, I think. Knees, shoulders. Spear. Paneling behind her. Soul cages. The rib cage assembly. A little more on that section right here. And going up along the wing. Make sure I haven't dropped hundreds of frames while I've blinked. Again, this is Tarnished Brass 09190. But got a pretty good chunk of it with that first drop. Go ahead and get the back side of this one next. Try to keep on camera as much as I can. Going back around the front. Just doing the lightest dusting possible over the wing struts. After all, they're supposed to be covered in undead flesh as much as they are metal. Alright, that took a while. Misty Gray 09090 I think is next. Not much of this, and again, that's not going to work. That's still too wet. Try a different one here. There we go. Let's do True Silver 09207 next and get the blades. This is clogged, so paper clip, clear it up. It's better. Gotta get a there. There we go. Need a thinner brush on this. Getting the witch barbs. Just arbitrarily deciding to start on Deneghra first here. Or rather, I should say Deneghra herself. And the chains. Big blade. dusting over the spikes along the tail. And on the wing blades, or the wing tips, yeah, they're blades too. Go both front and back. Fairly quick, light dusting there. Other side. Back around to the front. I think I've got exactly enough paint out to do the job. Good on frame drop so far. At least I haven't had any mass drops in this clip. Okay. Now the big one, 09206 Tarnished steel. Doing quite a bit because this is the bulk of the armor in general. Need to find a little brush. This should do. Starting on Deneghra's armor. Getting the stitches on her midriff. I'm at it. After all, she was literally cut in half by her twin, Victoria Haley. And a spear. Some mechanical joints near her barbs. Helmet. Back-headed spear. Make sure I get the gorget. Okay. I'm going to switch to a larger brush now, a slightly larger one. This should do. Make sure I haven't. Okay, good shape, good shape. Plate here. Saddle. Just about there. This is the biggest color to get. And as most of this creature slash vehicle is covered in this thick carapace armor. You'll see here the excess green is being covered up a little bit. Don't want all of it covered up, not completely. We want some of that showing through. Again, all about the illusion that this is glowing and illuminates from within. Okay. Not too much of this below the waist. Mostly these, pretty much just these armor plates here. Okay, still good on the, or at least tolerable on the frame here. Okay. There's a bit, this armor on the wings. Let's go ahead and do the front side and the back side. Okay, that's highlights. One little detail left. That's new gold, 09051. That was time consuming, but again, big model. And with this, I'm just going to go over the indents in the base. To clearly show the what's the word, boundaries of the front arc and the fields of fire. Alright, now I just have to base and seal. The basing is going to take place in 2 steps because I'm going to do something a little different. And, okay, back in a bit. Okay, time to start the basing. So, the usual solution of white glue and water. Getting a hefty amount of it since I've got a larger surface area to cover. And then, let's see here. I'll be using a much larger brush since I've got more surface area to cover. I just need to find that'll do. Get nice and even like that. And painting around the base. Going around the feet. Going right up to the edge of the lip here. Fortunately, there aren't too many it's not connection points, it's undercuts places touching the bottom of the base. I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is a little dazed right now. Okay, I'll do that. Now, because of the size, instead of dipping it in, I'm going to have to do it this way and just sprinkle the flock over. Not ideal, but you have to work with what you have. Okay. I'm using a brush that's dry. I'm going to push away from areas I don't want it, per usual. But now, here's what's making this one a little special with all this surface area. Normally you want to let this set to avoid holes, but this time I'm going to deliberately make a few. Because I'm going to include some patches of static grass here. I'll still have to wait for this to set before I conclude that, but this is the foundation of it. That should be more than enough patches, so 3, 6. Yeah, that'll give some visual interest once I get the static grass down. So once that's set, I can apply the static grass and wrap up. Okay, so now I'm going to be adding some static grass, and this is where it's going to get a little tricky. This may not work on the first try because my glue's kind of old. We'll just have to roll with it and see what happens. So there's the static grass itself. Need a little scissors, and yeah, that's the only color it comes in. So this is an adhesive called Hobby Tack, and it's really sticky, really old. So again, I don't know if this is going to work. I might have to go buy more and try this again later. I'm going to take a tuft. I'm going to pull out a tuft of it. I'm gripping on one, and I'm going to take the scissors and just cut it flat. Or as flat as I can. Now it's going to be awkward no matter how I do it. So the moment of truth, will this glue work? Just dip it on. This will dry clear. I'm going to place and let it set for a few seconds. It's generally going to take more than one tuft. It's just be patient. I'm going to get the rest and then come back around. It looks like and that happened. It looks like I lucked out on this glue. This can be a little tricky to work with, but it does have its advantages. Well, that's what I'm looking for. Not advantages, but it can give a little extra something to your basing. The glue seemed to work actually a little better because it's kind of old. Going to just keep repeating. Pull those errant threads on the bottom, though. It's going to get a little sloppy, and that's all there is to it. My hands are getting a little sticky, but again, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. It is what it is. Went down there a little funny. It should kind of fix it. And larger base models like this are perfect for adding a little extra like this. Like the glue is, I'll probably need to replace it before I do this again, but this is good enough to work with for now. You can see that part tipped over again. I'm just going to tilt it back up towards me. This is a very painstaking process. Just need to bear that in mind. It's going to take a little bit longer, but if you want the extra detail, worth it. Oh, looks like some companies are now making pre-assembled tufts. I know I saw them on Miniature Market the other day, but they are sold out already, but that's something they'll definitely restock again as soon as they can. And going back around full circle. Now this adhesive is going to take substantial time to dry, so that's just is what it is. And it's going to have to dry pretty completely. In fact, I actually let the flock dry overnight, so this step will work better, but this will have to dry for, oh boy, I'm not sure how long. It's been so long since I've used this. We'll still seal it in the end as normal, but okay. Well, my hands are getting so sticky at this point, I'm going to have to wash them before I can continue, but you get the idea, so I'll come back when it's dry. Alright. This took a few hours to dry, well, at least dry enough to work with. But before I varnish it, we need to trim this down. So taking the scissors, I'm going in at kind of random angles. That'll help give the impression of wild as opposed to, you know, the carefully manicured ones we're used to in modern urban society. It's a little gooey on that end, but that's alright. Alright, that's good enough. Now the scenic cement. To seal this all, I'm probably going to need a couple eyedroppers worth of this, but same process, just carefully just eyedrop it on until it looks wet. This will seal this all in here. Okay. And that is it. Wraith Witch Deneghra in all her malignant glory. So this was a long one. But up next, a heaping helping of Malifaux, all of which will be shorter. So until next time, I am Ian Stookie with Mastermind Games, signing out.